Hello everybody and welcome back. Now the last time I released the tech overview video for the Russians, people asked for actual gameplay footage of the Moskva. So here it is. This is tier 10 Russian cruiser, the Moskva, and like I mentioned in the preview video, she has beautiful arcs. Now, the beautiful arc part is an advantage and a disadvantage at exactly the same time. It makes it easier to hit targets, but frequently you do tend to plink targets off of their hull, and you don't really get a lot of deck hits. So there are certain weaknesses with regards to having the really flat arcs. Anyway, so we're playing on trap this time, and on trap I decided to go towards A. And I primarily am going towards A because radar. Because the enemy team's destroyers are bound to make a play for the cap, and if they come into the cap and they come close enough, I should be able to get a pretty good radar sweep and get some early hits in. So that Fubuki came in and, well, showed up, took a shot at him, popped smoke, popped radar, and I was able to get some pretty decent hits on that Fubuki. And of course, radar does have a very short duration, which is something about the Moskva that is... I mean, the radar has really good range, but the duration isn't all that great. You're talking, only 25 seconds. So unless you get a good amount of focus fire, it's hard to, straight up kill a destroyer by yourself. The one weakness, again, of all Russian cruisers is the very slow rudder shift time generally. And the Moskva is no exception. The rudder is very sluggish. However, unlike the tier 7 and the tier 8, the Moskva at least has a pretty decent turn radius. So as long as you're turning, if you get caught by torpedoes, you are at least able to, get into those gaps. If you're playing something a little bit more sluggish, you might find that very difficult to do, as your ship just simply doesn't turn fast enough. Right, but the turn radius and the rudder shift is still not that great, as I couldn't really get the turn off in time before I hit the border. So that tells you something about the Moskva. One other thing about the Moskva is that, as you can see, up to about 17 kilometers shell flight time is only about 8 seconds, which means that if you see a destroyer at distance, like a Shimakaze, you can actually take shots at them, and you have a decent chance of actually getting shells there. So, all's great with these arcs, right? Again, like I said earlier, the arcs have both their pros and their cons. One of the problems I find with the arcs is that sometimes you really want to get a shot over an island. Something that you can do with a lot of other cruisers. And with the Moskva, not an easy thing to do because the shell arcs are so flat, you have a tendency of just hitting islands frequently. And, trying to lob shells over, especially if you're closer to the island, is quite hard to do. Still, I mean, the shell velocity is still incredible, which means that, at least hitting stuff isn't all that difficult. Alright, so back to the actual match. We're now trying to get onto A, and then we're going to try to probably move for B afterwards, as the enemy team has secured C and they're in the process of capturing B. So, the thing about radar. Now, there's an interesting discussion to be had. I think radar is probably going to be most useful on maps that involve, multi-cap domination. If you're playing a standard battle where a destroyer can just play keep away, especially things like a Shimakaze, I don't think it's going to be all that great. However, if you're playing on a map where the destroyer has a role to cap something, I think it would be very useful, just because the radar is going to allow you to, one, push onto cap with either radar on to see if there's anything within 11 kilometers, and two, it should at least push things back as well. Oh yeah, and speaking of the arc again, there I go engaging that Kutuzov at 15 kilometers, and you can see the shells are getting there without much problems. Even more awesome at times is the fact that the shell arcs actually do pretty decent job against even ships like the battleships, like the North Carolina. So if the North Carolina, for example, gives you a broadside, even out to 17 kilometers, the 220mm guns on the Moskva do have the potential of citadeling. However, again, don't expect to citadel battleships frequently. It just can happen. Once again, still remember, though, you're still huge, you're not very maneuverable, and you basically have cruiser-level armor. So if you accidentally do give a broadside, and the battleship fires at you, you can still take citadel hits. Personally, because of that aspect, the fact that, you're huge, not super maneuverable, and you still have cruiser level protection, makes me think that the ideal targets for the Moskva is other cruisers and destroyers, if you can actually see them with radar. Cruisers are reasonably easy to kill with the Moskva. Again, the flat arcs hitting the belt armor, and if they give you a broadside, the damage is quite good. As this little engagement with the Kutuzov should show. I mean, the damage is solid, although the first shot I did aim a little bit high, and I think quite a few shells either overpenned or did very little damage. But once you adjust it, the damage becomes quite solid, as you are able to get either a lot of citadels or just a very, very solid amount of damage. And with the Moskva's rate of fire, which once you equip the reload module increases to 6.6 rounds a minute, it's solid because you're able to get shells out quickly. Speaking of modules, yeah, you would really want to probably run the reload module, namely because the Moskva isn't really meant to get close to things, and you're generally trying to stay far away. And if you stay far away, the extra turret traverse isn't going to matter all that much. However, still, if you get close with the Moskva, it's not like her turrets are so slow, like the Warspite, that it takes forever to turn. The turrets still do turn, and the extra rate of fire does allow you to get shells out quickly, which is a huge advantage when you have such nice guns. At this stage of the battle, I've done just shy of 50,000 damage, which isn't all that much. But the enemy team has 2 caps, so I'm like, okay, they've got a cap advantage, and I'm like, we gotta push onto B. If we want to have a chance of maybe even winning this, we got to push B, we got to take Bravo, and maybe if we can sync things fast enough, we have a decent chance of actually winning this. Another thing to talk about with regards to the Moskva is actually the ship's speed. The Moskva is a pretty fast cruiser. Without a flag, she goes 34.5 knots, and if you throw a flag on her, she's going to go 36.2. And that is a very, very speedy ship. It's going to allow you to move around quickly and to, sort of shift on the battlefield. It should also make it reasonably good at kiting, so sort of running away and trying to kite. Although, like I mentioned before, the slow rudder shift time is going to make it difficult for you to actually do that bit of a wiggle. It's going to be more difficult on the Moskva than in any other cruiser. Now, I am going to engage the Suzumo, and what you're going to see is that the Moskva's guns do pretty solid damage against battleships. However, when I start to engage cruisers, that's when you're going to really see what the ship is good at, and that is just killing cruisers. I think that's what the Moskva is. Still, I mean, even though if you look at her in terms of her guns, her armor and everything, she's not a full-fledged battle cruiser yet. And I'm actually interested, just for sort of a future thing, is how actual battle cruisers would affect this game, and how battle cruisers might affect potential games against things like the Moskva, because they would actually be, cruiser level protection but battleship caliber guns, while the Moskva has pretty much cruiser caliber guns on cruiser caliber protection with battleship size. I don't know, it's something to think about. So anyhow, against the Izumo, I did get some pretty solid hits. Again, the flat arcs do prevent me from really hitting the deck armor. But overall, I mean, per salvo, I was seeing pretty much on average about 4k damage, which is pretty solid. But now there's a bunch of cruisers in front of me, and this is where I think the Moskva really, really shines. So nice flat arc against the Baltimore, hit the forward magazine there for a citadel, 10,000 damage. Baltimore turns around and angles the armor, so I switch my attention to the Atago. And as you can tell, at 8 kilometers, the shell flight time to target, 3.4 seconds, which is incredibly fast. And, easy double citadel there on the Atago. Still remember, though, that I mentioned that the Moskva does have cruiser caliber guns. They're slightly bigger than the other cruisers, but they're still cruiser caliber guns. So what the enemy cruisers can do to defend themselves is stay angled. As you will see that if the Baltimore becomes angled, I am going to have a lot more difficulty trying to penetrate its armor. And that's pretty much true for if you're running into a Moskva in a Des Moines. If you angle and you point your bow into the Moskva isn't really going to be able to pen you all that much. However, if you give it even a little bit of a broadside, you're going to be facing quite a lot of pain. Now, there are a lot of people out there who have expressed, I guess, a worry about radar being implemented, and I do think I should talk about radar a little bit more. What does radar primarily hurt? Well, it hurts destroyers like this Fletcher who are going to do this. Once I started firing on this Fletcher, what's going to happen is the Fletcher does what a lot of US gunboats do, which is pop smoke and try to go invisible. And if you do that against a radar-equipped Moskva, well, it's not really going to work because Moskva is going to turn up radar and is going to light you. And during the next 25 seconds after the radar goes on, you are going to be vulnerable. So some people might say, well, does that mean that gunboats are going to suffer the most and they're going to become, a ship class that nobody plays? And I don't necessarily think so. And the reason I don't think so is because gunboats, especially the ones that I've played so far, like the Russian ones, I'm pretty much spotted all the time anyways while I'm firing my guns. And so as a gunboat, it should be something that you're used to being spotted all the time. I mean, the days of, permanently just invisifiring all the time is kind of gone. So what you're doing primarily is using your fleet, the ships that you're with, as cover. So for example, if you have let's say your battleships are behind you, you have cruisers behind you, and you're a little bit in front of them. You're doing a couple things. One, you're providing early warning against torpedoes. And second, your fleet, which is right behind you, if you sort of weave behind them a little bit and come out, and weave out behind them a little bit and come out, they are the main targets, and you're just able to sort of be there and use them as cover while dropping shells on enemy ships and causing that sort of nuisance role of just annoying enemy ships. So I think that's the gunboat thing. The stealth is good maybe at longer ranges, but when you're at longer ranges, let's say 14 kilometers, you're outside of radar's range anyways. It's when you are a little bit closer that, yes, radar is a worry, but as long as you do that role where you're spotted anyways, the radar doesn't really change all that much. And quickly before I go back to destroyers, did you see those citadels I had on the Baltimore and the Des Moines? Those were nice, right? Those are really, really nice citadels, and they do actually give me quite a bit of damage. All right, so quickly back to the destroyer topic. Someone is bound to mention that, hey, look, the US destroyers are going to be affected. Well, sort of. I think the US destroyers might be the ones where there is the greatest change in playstyle. The US destroyers might really have to play to that hybrid role, which is, try to get used to their higher arcs at range, try to get some shells down at long range, and then using torpedoes, because the US torpedoes aren't that bad. And, sort of maybe switch to a more torpedo first and then gun second option. So come into torpedo range, drop the torpedoes, come back out, and then when you get to a safe area, start dropping shells from there. Anyways, going back to that Moskva battle, and here are the results. I did about 160,000 damage. It was a losing effort, and on the losing team, I managed 1,521 base experience. Anyways, I hope this video has given you some insights into radar, destroyer play, and also the Moskva as the ship. If you have any questions, do make sure you leave those in the comment section below, and I'll try my best to get back to you. Aside from all that, hope you all have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.